If you've been following the news out of Rome, you know that there has been quite a lot of turbulence, disturbance, dissension, conflict regarding the Synod on the Family. We're going to focus on that today and show you, at least in part, what went wrong. This is the voice of resistance.
Those who forsake the law praise the wicked. Those who uphold the law resist them. Welcome to the Voice of Resistance. Here's your host, Randall Terry.
No matter what theological school you are from, no matter what denomination you are in, whether you are Roman Catholic, Greek or Russian Orthodox, part of a mainline denomination, in an evangelical independent church, it cannot be overstated what a public relations disaster happened, at least in part, last week regarding the Roman Catholic Synod on the Family. And for those of you who are Catholic, I know that you're going to be engaged. For those of you who are Protestant or something else, you might be engaged because you recognize that what impacts the Catholic Church impacts the entire world. Some of you might be saying, who cares what the Catholics are doing? Don't speak so fast. I remember when I was in Bible school, one of the instructors saying, look, whether we like it or not, the Catholic Church is the big brother in the room. And when something happens to the Catholic Church or inside the Catholic Church, it's going to affect all of Christendom, all of Christianity. So it will behoove everyone to pay close attention to what's going on. Now, I'm going to take my time as we go through this show and take a look at this cover of the website Mail Online, the Daily Mail, which is a British paper. Massive Vatican shift on gay sex. Summit on Family Life says unmarried couples living together can be positive. Gays and divorcees must be welcomed and contraception respected. Catholic Church adopts rare progressive tone during talks of family issues. 2-week summit reached midway point today with the release of a document summarizing the extent of the closed-door debate so far, etc., etc. This was a public relations disaster, and as we'll see as the show continues, the more objectionable parts of the midterm report that were released were in fact rescinded, all right? And there was a lot of backtracking, there was a lot of damage control, but the people in the secular press who were covering this, most of them are clearly not Catholic or don't understand Catholic doctrine. And so there was almost this giddy rush to excitement, like finally, the Catholic Church gets a clue. They're going to change 2,000 years of church dogma. And anyone who is familiar with Catholic Church hierarchy, Catholic Church dogma, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, knows that that simply is not going to happen. But nonetheless, it caused an earthquake, and it caused and is going to continue to cause severe problems at the local level for the pastors of local Catholic parishes. But before we go any further, let me read to you, put them on the screen, okay? And I'll read to you the 3 paragraphs that ultimately were pulled from the document that caused such a public relations crisis. Paragraph 50. And by the way, this is under a section of the document called Providing for Homosexual Persons. Paragraph 50. Homosexuals have gifts and qualities to offer the Christian community. Are we capable of providing for these people, guaranteeing them a place of fellowship in our communities? Oftentimes, they want to encounter a church which offers them a welcoming home. Are our communities capable of this, accepting and valuing their sexual orientation without compromising Catholic doctrine on the family and matrimony? That one paragraph that one phrase, are our communities capable of accepting and valuing their sexual orientation? Well, there was a massive struggle internally at this synod with some very left-wing cardinals and bishops who have an agenda that is outside of normal Catholic doctrine. And then there was massive pushback from Catholics who are faithful to the faith, men like Cardinal Burke, who said, no, this is not and it cannot be, saying that homosexual acts are inherently disordered. So we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'll read the next 2 paragraphs and we'll talk about what it means for something to be inherently disordered. And we will look at the fallout at the local level for priests who are dealing with parishioners who are struggling with this sin. Don't go away.
You have 2 choices. I mean, you can try to raise your children by design, or you will raise them by default. There are no perfect parents. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. If we have a plan, we've got a better chance of getting it right in the long run.
There is something deep within the heart of every human being that longs for parental acceptance and approval. When does a boy become a man?
Get a group of guys around and ask them that question.
I don't think there's a certain age. Some men stay boys their whole life.
I would say, 16, 18 years old?
Wow, that's a good question.
When they get bar mitzvah.
Well, I think when he has a child. So I just became at 56, 56 years old.
Without the power of the Holy Spirit changing us and giving us power over our sin, we can't hope to be the dads that our kids need us to be.
The Catholic Synod on the Family was the first, happening in October of 2014, of what will be a 2-part synod. And the next synod will gather in October of 2015. There will be far more participants, both on the ecclesial level and with lay people. This was a midterm report that was released. And as I stated in the first section, in case you don't know it, the 3 paragraphs in question were actually stricken from the document that was to be released publicly as the final document. However, Pope Francis decided that he was going to leave these 3 paragraphs. In fact, he was going to leave the entire document, which was at least in part rejected by a majority vote of the Synod. He decided he would leave these paragraphs in the document that was released to Catholic parishes all over the world for the sake of discourse and debate and discussion. And as you can imagine, this has a lot of people scratching their head saying, what is Pope Francis doing? Because this is causing an enormous amount of confusion and dissension and scandal at the local level. My wife and I were talking the other night. I was talking with a friend saying, well, is it possible that Pope Francis is giving certain clerics enough rope to hang themselves? In other words, putting them in a situation where they can have this debate and push for an agenda that is clearly outside of the Catholic faith and Catholic behavioral norms and Catholic dogma. Letting them push for it so that they identify themselves and then it can be dealt with as traitors in the midst. I've been speaking to people, reading, and there are some people who believe that that is possible, that there are other people who say, no, that's not true. He has to know that this is causing damage, and he needs to speak clearly on this, which he hasn't done. You can see the difficulties this is causing. So let me read to you paragraph 51 and 52. The question of homosexuality requires serious reflection on how to devise realistic approaches to effective growth, human development, and maturation in the gospel, while integrating the sexual aspect. all of which constitute an important educative challenge. Does anyone besides me think that this is not saying much? This is really watered down. There's nothing here that thunders. There's nothing here that's clear and decisive. It continues. Moreover, the Church affirms that unions between people of the same sex cannot be considered on the same level as marriage between man and woman. Nor is it acceptable that the pastor's outlook be pressured or that international bodies make financial aid depending on the introduction of regulations based on gender ideology. Now, this is not bad, inherently bad, but it falls short because of what it doesn't say. Notice what it says. It says the Church affirms that unions between people of the same sex can never be considered on the same level as marriage between man and woman. All right, well, can they be considered on any level? The statement is ambiguous enough to leave it as an open question. And that's why there were certain people saying, maybe the Church is opening the door for civil unions between people of the same gender. Maybe the Church is willing to, as this says earlier, to value the sexual orientation of homosexuals. It doesn't say in there what the Catechism says, and I'm going to get to that in a little while, that acts between people, sexual acts between people of the same gender, are inherently disordered. And in another place it says they're inherently sinful or inherently evil. And in ancient Catholic and Orthodox theology, there are sins that cry to heaven. All right? One of them is murder. One of them is sexual acts between people of the same gender. All right? Remember when God sent judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah? He spoke about these sins, the cry of them has reached up. That's what it's talking about. So, you know, I'm glad that they said that international bodies should not put pressure on priests, or that, you know, financial aid should not be connected to the position that people hold on this, but that's far from enough. What this could have said, what it should have said, was that marriage is always and only between one man and one woman, and nothing can ever permit the sexual union of people of the same gender to not only not be on par with marriage, but to be given any type of special blessing or special notice, because the act itself is inherently disordered. I'll be right back with the third paragraph and a little bit of the Catholic Catechism. Do you want to get America out of the hands of wicked and unjust men and women who are destroying the republic before our eyes, and put leadership back into the hands of righteous men and women so that we don't die as a nation? Well, you're talking about social revolution, and there are rules in social revolution. We can look at the victorious social revolutions of the past, such as the end of slavery, the end of child labor, women's voting rights, the end of segregation, and so much more, and learn from their victories. Look at their actions, their images, their rhetoric, their sacrifices, and their final fruit. We will send you this series that originally cost $129, 7 books for students, 1 teacher's guide, if you'll give a gift of any size and just pay for shipping and handling. Take advantage of it today. If you just joined us, we're looking at the public relations disaster that came out of the Vatican last week with the release of a midterm report prematurely, got to the press, and it had a bunch of things in it that had to do with contraception, with marriage, with divorce, with communion. 3 of the paragraphs that are getting most of the coverage were paragraph 50, 51, 52. I will now read paragraph 52. Without denying the moral problems associated with homosexual unions, there are instances where mutual assistance to the point of sacrifice is a valuable support in the life of these persons. Furthermore, the church pays special attention to children who live with same-sex couples and stresses that the needs and rights of the little ones must always be given priority. Well, without question, children in these situations is going to require incredible pastoral care. But the issue becomes the scandal to other people in the community, to other children. I mean, think about it. If you're in a local church, from whatever denomination you're from, and a so-called same-gender couple comes with their children, what impact does that have on other kids? What message does it send? What value? I mean, how can you say, well, this is a beautiful thing? Or do you say, well, no, this is disordered. This is wrong. This is unethical. And this is harming those children. How do you then deal with the children? On a pastoral level? On a sacramental level? All right, let me read to you what the Catechism says. Then I'll read to you the Pope's words, which will show why there's still difficulty. Catechism, I found this today, 2357, says, homosexuality refers to relations between men or between women who experience an exclusive or predominant sexual attraction toward persons of the same sex. It has taken a great variety of forms through the centuries and in different cultures. Its psychological genesis remains largely unexplained. Basing itself on sacred scriptures, which presents homosexual acts as acts of grave depravity, tradition has always declared that, quote, homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered. They are contrary to the natural law. They close the sexual act to the gift of life. They do not proceed from a genuine, affective, and sexual complementarity. Under no circumstances can they be approved. All right? That rings, that thunders. It's clear. Compare that to those 3 paragraphs, and you can see why those 3 paragraphs reflect a departure from that. Now, what does the phrase intrinsically disordered mean? Here is one definition that I found online. It says, grounded in the natural law, the Church notes that while the sexual attraction to the female classmate of a man can be and is naturally ordered toward his good, the sexual attraction to his male classmate cannot be ordered toward his good. This is what the Church means when it uses the term disorder. This came from a section that said, look, if there's a college male and he's attracted to a college female, it could lead him to sin, but it could also lead him to marriage and holiness and having children, right? So it's ordered to lead him towards something good. Whereas an attraction to a person of the same gender is always disordered, because if it leads to an act, the act is sinful or evil or disordered. Now, here's what the Pope said in his closing remarks to the bishops and the lay people that were there. And this, by the way, his speech was made public, all right? They were very open and transparent about this, which had people happy. Here are the Pope's words, which, as you'll see, I'll tell you ahead of time, they're already causing confusion. He talked about temptations that they will now face as a result of this synod. He said, 1, a temptation to hostile inflexibility. That is, wanting to close oneself within the written word, the letter, and not allowing oneself to be surprised by God, by the God of surprises, the Spirit, within the law, within the certitude of what we know, and not of what we still need to learn and to achieve. From the time of Christ, it is the temptation of the zealous, of the scrupulous, of the solicitous, and of the so-called today traditionalists, and also of the intellectuals. Then he talked about another temptation, the temptation to a destructive tendency to goodness. In the Italian, it's buonismo. That in the name of deceptive mercy binds the wounds without first curing them and treating them, that treats the symptoms and not the causes and the roots. It is the temptation of the do-gooders, of the fearful, and also of the so-called progressives and liberals. So from the position of a layman, it looks like he's talking out of both sides of his mouth. Are we upholding, is our temptation that we're going to be too rigid, that we're going to uphold the scriptures and we're going to uphold church law, or is the temptation that we're going to have a deceptive mercy? I don't get it. So this is causing shockwaves around the world. When we come back, I'm going to read to you a few words that a priest said who was directly impacted by this in his community within the last week as a direct result of the synod. Don't go away. We have put together what we call an online university for you. Now that's a highfalutin way of saying that we have a pretty significant library of material, books, tapes, videos that are there for you for free. Why are we doing this? Because America is desperate for new leaders, and because this material could help you to become the leader that you and God want you to be. Check it out and enjoy it. It is better to have an ambitious plan than none at all. Sir Winston Churchill. The fallout from the 3 paragraphs that I mentioned and others has been immediate and widespread. One priest in America wrote on a blog and said this. He said, here is an example. Twice in the last week, I have had to deal with Catholics in irregular marriages. An irregular marriage is one that does not line up with the canons of the church, for whatever reason. One woman married outside the church and told me that she thought it was now okay for her to come to communion because, quote, the Pope has changed all those old rules, period, close quote. Another man has divorced his wife and is living with another woman. He also assured me, very confidently, that it is now fine for him to come to communion because, quote, Pope Francis has changed the rules, close quote. I know you mean well, Holy Father, that's referring to the Pope. I know you mean well, Holy Father, and I admire and like you, but this process on which you have led us is not helping. I have spent much of the last few weeks grieving the state of our nation, the state of the world. The cover story on The Economist last week had 2 men holding hands talking about how great it is that all over the world there are these massive strides forward for the homosexual movement, and then there's these little pockets of resistance. But to see equivocation, to see what some people believe was a collapse of resistance, certainly there was with certain members of the Catholic hierarchy in the Vatican last week, is truly demoralizing. To see the couple in Idaho being threatened with jail of evangelical ministers if they don't perform same-sex marriage. To see the interview on CNN with the Hillsong pastor in New York City, and I love Hillsong music, but where he refuses to publicly take a stand regarding homosexuality. We're being overrun. And fear, the fear of man's opinion, the fear of the hatred of our enemies and the enemies of the gospel has so gripped the hearts of Christian leaders from many denominations that resistance is collapsing. And so I end this episode with the sober encouragement to you that from whatever denomination you're from, in whatever area you can make a difference, take a stand. Be gracious to the people who are struggling with this particular sin. This is very personal to me. My late son was an active homosexual. So I know the stress it puts on families. But I encourage you to take a stand for what is true and just and offer true mercy to those who are trapped in this sin, and hope that truth and righteousness will be reestablished in the public square.